The neural link was meant for research, but it took her on a journey through laughter. The accidental connection. Dr. Zara Okafor rubbed her tired eyes and glanced at the clock on her workstation. 3:17 in the morning. The neural interface. Lab hummed quietly around her, banks of monitors casting blue light across empty chairs and dormant equipment. She should have gone home hours ago, but the calibration data from today's session kept nagging at her. Something was off in the neural pathway mappings, and she couldn't let it slide until tomorrow. "Still here, Dr. Okafor?" Liam Chen appeared in the doorway, his lab coat wrinkled from a long day. The young technician carried a steaming cup of coffee and wore the expression of someone who'd drawn the short straw for night shift duty. "Just finishing up some adjustments," Zara replied, not looking away from her screens. "The theta wave patterns in Sector 7 were irregular during today's session with patient 23B. I want to recalibrate the stimulation protocols before we continue tomorrow." Liam set his coffee down and joined her at the main console. Patient 23B was Nora Blackwood, a 34-year-old graphic designer who'd volunteered for their experimental depression treatment program. For the past 6 weeks, Nora had been coming in 3 times a week to have her brain stimulated by their revolutionary neural interface technology. The results had been promising, but inconsistent. "Maybe the irregularities are actually progress," Liam suggested, pulling up Nora's psychological evaluation scores. "Her depression index has dropped significantly since we started. Sometimes, the brain creates new pathways when it's healing." Zara frowned at the data streams flowing across her multiple monitors. The neural interface they'd developed was designed to target specific regions associated with depression and anxiety, delivering precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses to encourage healthier neural activity. It was groundbreaking work that could revolutionize mental health treatment, but it required absolute precision. "I don't like guesswork when it comes to people's brains," she muttered, adjusting the frequency parameters. "Let me run a quick diagnostic simulation to make sure our targeting remains accurate." She initiated the calibration sequence, watching as the system began its automated checks. The neural interface helmet sat in its charging cradle nearby, its sleek design hiding incredibly sophisticated technology. Dozens of microsensors could map brain activity in real time while delivering therapeutic stimulation with millimeter precision. "You know," Liam said, settling into his chair with his coffee, "Nora mentioned something interesting during her exit interview today. She said she's been having more vivid dreams lately. Funny ones. She used to barely dream at all when her depression was severe." Zara paused in her work. Dreams were often the first sign that their treatment was working, as the brain began processing emotions and memories more actively. "That's actually encouraging. Improved REM sleep patterns usually correlate with—" The lights flickered. Both scientists looked up as the overhead fluorescence wavered, then steadied. A moment later, every piece of equipment in the lab hummed louder as power fluctuated through the building's electrical system. "Probably just the building's old wiring," Liam said, but his voice carried uncertainty. The research facility was housed in a converted warehouse, and electrical problems weren't uncommon. Zara was about to agree when her workstation's alarms began chirping. Warning indicators flashed across multiple screens as the calibration system registered dangerous power spikes. The neural interface helmet in its cradle began glowing more brightly than normal, its status lights cycling through colors she'd never seen before. "Shut it down," she ordered, her fingers flying over the emergency controls. But the system wasn't responding to her commands. The power fluctuations had somehow triggered a feedback loop in the neural interface, and it was building toward something she didn't understand. "I can't." Liam's voice was tight with panic as he worked his own console. "The safety protocols aren't engaging. It's like the system is locked in some kind of runaway sequence." The helmet's glow intensified, and Zara could hear a high-pitched whine building in its circuitry. She grabbed for the manual shutdown lever, but as her hand closed around it, a massive electrical surge shot through the building. Every light went out for a split second, then blazed back to life twice as bright as before. The neural interface helmet erupted in a cascade of light and sound. Zara felt electricity arc through her hand as she tried to pull the shutdown lever. But instead of disconnecting the system, the surge seemed to activate something entirely different. The helmet's sensors began broadcasting in patterns she'd never programmed, creating a field of electromagnetic activity that filled the lab. "Dr. Okafor, get away from there," Liam shouted, but it was too late. The field enveloped Zara, and suddenly she wasn't standing in her lab anymore. She was floating in a space that felt both infinite and intimate, surrounded by swirling patterns of color and sound that seemed almost familiar. No, not familiar. Funny. The patterns were somehow inherently amusing, carrying the essence of humor itself. And she wasn't alone. A woman's voice echoed around her, warm and slightly bewildered. "Well, this is new. Are you supposed to be here?" Zara tried to speak, but found she didn't need to use her voice. Her thoughts simply became words in this strange space. "I don't think either of us is supposed to be here. Are you Nora? Patient 23B? "Just Nora is fine," came the amused reply. "And yes, though I'm pretty sure I was asleep in my apartment 5 minutes ago. Now I seem to be having the most interesting dream about floating in what looks like a cosmic comedy club." As if summoned by her words, the space around them began to shift and take shape. They were indeed in something resembling a vast amphitheater. But instead of seats, there were floating islands of memory and experience. Each island glowed with its own light and seemed to contain entire worlds of human experience, all somehow connected to laughter and joy. "This is impossible," Zara whispered, watching islands drift past them carrying scenes of childhood birthday parties, late-night conversations with friends, and moments of spontaneous silliness. The neural interface was supposed to target depression centers, not whatever this is. Maybe it did. Nora's voice carried a note of wonder. Maybe this is what was hiding underneath all those dark thoughts. Maybe this is what I forgot I had. One of the floating islands drifted close enough for Zara to see clearly. On its surface, she watched a 10-year-old version of Nora dissolve into giggles as her father told increasingly ridiculous knock-knock jokes. The memory was so vivid, so full of pure joy that Zara found herself smiling despite her confusion. "I remember that day," Nora said softly. "Dad was trying to cheer me up after I'd scraped my knee. I hadn't thought about those jokes in 20 years, but I can still hear every terrible punchline." More islands floated into view, each one carrying its own comedic treasure. There were memories of movies that had made Nora laugh until she cried, friends who'd shared inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else, and moments of absurd humor that had brightened even her darkest days. "This is your mind," Zara realized, awe creeping into her voice. "These are all your memories of laughter and humor. But how are we both here? How are we sharing this experience?" "Maybe your machine finally worked right," Nora suggested, her tone playful despite the surreal circumstances. "Maybe instead of zapping away the bad stuff, it opened a door to the good stuff, and maybe you got pulled along for the ride." Before Zara could respond, the cosmic comedy club around them began to shift again. The floating islands started moving, faster, drawn by some invisible current toward what looked like a glowing archway in the distance. As they approached, Zara could hear something that made her scientific mind reel with impossibility. She could hear laughter itself, not the sound of someone laughing, but the pure essence of laughter as a force of nature. "I think," Nora said with growing excitement, "we're about to go on quite an adventure. Hope you have a good sense of humor, Dr. Okafor." Zara wanted to protest, to explain why this was scientifically impossible, and potentially dangerous. But as they passed through the archway and into whatever lay beyond, she found herself grinning instead. After all, how often did a neuroscientist get to explore the actual architecture of human joy? The last thing she heard before they plunged into the deeper mysteries of Nora's comedic consciousness was Liam's distant voice in the real world, frantically calling for help as two bodies lay unconscious in a lab filled with impossible light. The journey through laughter. Nora Blackwood had always thought of her mind as a cluttered apartment, messy, disorganized, with too many dark corners she preferred not to explore. But now, sharing this impossible space with Dr. Okafor, she realized she'd been living in only the basement of a magnificent mansion. "Stay close," she told the bewildered scientist as they emerged from the glowing archway into what she could only describe as the grand central station of human humor. "I've never been this deep in my own head before, but something tells me we don't want to get separated." The space around them defied every law of physics Zara knew. They stood on a platform that seemed to be made of crystallized laughter, transparent, but solid, resonating with harmonious chimes whenever they moved. Around them, multiple levels of walkways and passages stretched in impossible directions, each one leading to different districts of comedic experience. "This is extraordinary," Zara breathed, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "The neural pathways associated with humor are far more complex than we ever imagined. Look at the interconnections. Comedy isn't just processed. In one area, it's woven throughout your entire consciousness. Less analyzing, more moving," Nora urged, pointing to a disturbing sight in the distance. Some of the walkways were beginning to flicker and fade, their crystalline structure becoming unstable. "I don't think this connection was meant to last. We need to find a way out before—" A voice interrupted her from above. "Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged into the comedy club." They looked up to see a man in his 40s with wild hair and a mischievous grin, dressed in the sort of rumpled suit that suggested either genius or madness. He was standing on a walkway that definitely hadn't been there moments before, juggling what appeared to be glowing punchlines. "Tommy?" Nora's voice filled with recognition and complicated emotions. "But you're not. You can't be here. You're just a memory." "Best kind of person to be," Tommy Brennan replied, somersaulting down to their level with impossible grace. "No baggage, no bad days, just the pure essence of every laugh I ever gave you. Though I have to say, bringing a tourist along for the grand tour is a new one, even for you." Zara stared at the figure before them. "You're a memory construct? This is fascinating. The neural interface has somehow created a stable projection of—" "Lady, you're in a place where the laws of physics take coffee breaks," Tommy interrupted, with a grin. "Maybe save the doctoral thesis for when you're back in meat space? Right now we've got bigger problems." He gestured toward the flickering walkways, which were disappearing at an alarming rate. "The neural link is destabilizing. Normally, when someone visits the comedy district, it's just for a quick giggle and then back to regular programming. But you two have been here too long, drawn too much power. The whole system is starting to collapse." "What does that mean?" Zara asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "It means," came a new voice, crisp and professional, "that if we don't get you out of here soon, you'll both be trapped in a permanent loop of comedic consciousness." A woman in a white coat materialized beside them. Not the rumpled, slightly unreal appearance of Tommy, but solid and immediate. She looked exactly like someone who'd been called in to handle an emergency. "Dr. Violet Hayes, emergency neural specialist," she introduced herself briskly. "I'm broadcasting from the lab where your physical bodies are currently unconscious. The good news is you're both alive. The bad news is your brain patterns are synchronized in a way we've never seen before, and we're not sure how to separate you safely." "Can you hear us clearly from out there?" Nora asked. "Crystal clear. The neural interface is functioning as a two-way communication system now, but listen carefully. The longer you remain connected, the more your individual consciousness patterns merge. We need to get you out, but the path back to normal awareness runs through the deepest part of Nora's comedic processing center. Tommy whistled low. The core? Nobody goes to the core. That's where all the really big stuff lives. The humor that kept you alive through the worst times. The laughter that saved you from drowning in depression. It's not just funny down there. It's essential. Nora felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. She knew exactly what Tommy meant. There were jokes and moments of levity that had been more than entertainment. They'd been lifelines thrown to a drowning soul. We don't have a choice. Dr. Hayes's voice came through with increasing urgency. Your neural patterns are starting to merge at the quantum level. In approximately 15 minutes, the distinction between your individual consciousnesses will be permanently erased. The platform beneath them shuddered, and several nearby walkways dissolved entirely. In the distance, Nora could see entire districts of memory and experience winking out of existence as the neural link overloaded. Right then, Tommy said, producing what looked like a map made of pure light. Good news is I know a shortcut to the core. Bad news is we'll have to pass through the dark comedy district, and that place, well, let's just say it's where all the gallows humor lives. They began moving quickly along the remaining stable pathways, Tommy leading the way with the confidence of someone who belonged in this impossible place. As they traveled deeper into Nora's mind, the nature of the humor around them began to change. This is where I learned to laugh at pain, Nora explained quietly as they passed through a district where the laughter had sharp edges. Here, floating memories showed her making jokes during chemotherapy treatments for a cancer scare, turning anxiety into absurdity during job interviews, finding the ridiculous in moments of genuine despair. Humor as a survival mechanism, Zara observed, her scientific mind still working even in this surreal environment. You've been unconsciously using comedy to process trauma and maintain psychological resilience. Everyone does, Tommy said over his shoulder. The difference is, most people don't realize they're doing it. Nora here, she made it into an art form. They paused at the edge of a chasm that seemed to stretch infinitely downward. Far below, Nora could see a warm golden light that pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. The core, Tommy announced. The foundational humor that defines who you are. But there's only one way down. He pointed to what appeared to be a slide made of pure joy, a spiraling pathway that disappeared into the depths of Nora's psyche. It looked both inviting and terrifying. Dr. Hayes, Zara called out, what's our status? 8 minutes remaining, before permanent neural merger. Your brain waves are harmonizing at frequencies we didn't know were possible. Nora looked at Zara, this scientist who'd accidentally tumbled into the most private parts of her mind. I'm sorry you got dragged into this, but I have to ask, are you ready to see what laughter really looks like when it's all that stands between someone and the void? Zara took a deep breath that somehow worked even in this non-physical space. Lead the way. They stepped onto the slide together and immediately began spiraling down through layers of Nora's consciousness. As they descended, the walls around them came alive with moments of pure essential humor, a child's first successful joke, the shared laughter between friends that creates lifelong bonds, the gentle humor of a grandmother teaching life lessons through silly stories. But deeper still, they encountered something more profound, the laughter that emerges from the recognition of shared human absurdity, the comedy that comes from accepting life's fundamental ridiculousness, the joy that exists not despite suffering, but because of the courage to find light in darkness. At the very bottom, they landed softly in a chamber that seemed to be made of crystallized warmth. In the center stood a figure Nora recognized immediately, herself, but at age 7, giggling uncontrollably at absolutely nothing, possessed by the pure joy of being alive. This is it, Tommy said reverently. The source code, the original, laughter that every other joke references back to. The child Nora looked up at them with bright eyes. "Want to hear something funny?" she asked in a voice like silver bells. "Always," Nora replied, and meant it. "Being alive is the punchline to the universe's biggest joke," the child said with perfect innocence. "And we're all in on it." The chamber filled with laughter, not the sound of it, but the pure essence. And in that moment, both Nora and Zara understood something fundamental about consciousness, connection, and the courage required to find joy in an uncertain world. "Time to go home," Dr. Hayes's voice reached them. "I'm initiating the separation protocol. Hold on to who you are." As the golden light surrounded them and the neural link began to dissolve, Nora felt herself returning to her individual consciousness. But she carried with her something new, the memory of sharing her deepest joy with another human being, and the knowledge that laughter truly was a bridge between souls. In the lab, two bodies stirred as the neural interface powered down. Zara Okafor opened her eyes first, then Nora Blackwood. They looked at each other across the room and, simultaneously, began to laugh. "Same time next week?" Nora asked, and they both laughed harder. Some discoveries, they realized, were worth the risk.